Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, politics, history, pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, youtube.com/Annette Talks, and AnnetteTalks.com. And today we're going to be talking about something that's a little bit othery, although it goes along with my theme of the year for being prepared for disasters, which goes along with what's happening politically right now. And so today we're going to be talking about ham radios. And I don't know, for some reason, when I posted that topic on Facebook, my millennial friend laughed at me. So I guess ham radio must be a relic-y kind of term. But I brought in a professional, Eric Krovic. I pronounced that right? Aaron, shoot. See, I messed it up. Aaron Krovic. Aaron, we don't know each other, in my defense. We met each other through a mutual Facebook friend, right?
Yeah, John.
Yes, and as soon as you said you had 13 or 14 ham radios, I was like, yeah, this guy, he'll do it.
With more on the way.
Yeah, he knows his stuff. So tell us a little bit about you, Aaron, and how it is that you know so much about ham radios.
Well, I got my license about 7 years ago. At the time, I didn't really know why, and I worked with a guy who was a ham. He says, you should do this. And I go, all right, well, went and did the thing. So I got the license, got a radio, and then that was kind of it for a while. And then we do a lot of off-roading, and so there's a radio in my truck, and then there's one in my wife's vehicle, and so that lets us have comms out on the trail, and that makes it really convenient to stay in touch, and we can be quite a ways apart and still be in communications. And so I just, I'm a gadget guy, so there's the radio that I had in the truck, and then I decided that, well, I want to get a fancier one just because I'm a gadget guy. And then I started getting hooked on all the stuff that the fancier one could do. And then, well, now I need an even fancier one. Now, like I said, I'm 13, 14, however many I've gotten. I literally do have more on the way.
Why so many? Because we were talking before the episode, and so just so my listeners know, I'm a total newbie at this. I have no clue. I don't own any. I don't know how to do it. It just seems like the way things are going right now, especially with people being deplatformed online, that there are a lot of us that want alternate ways to communicate. And so the most alternate way I could think of was ham radio, because it doesn't depend on Wi-Fi or internet or anything.
There's no off switch.
Yeah, and so I'm still picturing the ham radio, the big ham radio down in the basement. Like I even picture like World War II stuff. Like I'm seeing these big radios with the radio tube and everything, and Uncle Joe down in the basement, with his call sign and everything. And so from what you told me just a little bit that we talked beforehand, that it can do stuff like texting and phone calls and stuff, that I'm like, what? So what do you do with so many radios?
So each one, they don't make a radio that does everything. So, here's how nerdy I am. Even my cell phone is a ham radio as well.
Really?
And, but so you've got your basic stuff, and you've got a little bit more advanced. And so this is analog only, and we'll kind of talk about what that means in a little bit. This one's analog digital. It does APRS.
So those of you that are just listening, if you go to YouTube and watch this episode, this is going to be, I think, episode maybe 65, I'm not sure. But you need to see, because he's showing us some of his radios. Okay.
Right. And as far as what we're talking about today, preparedness, you don't need all this. I like to tinker, so I have all this. Basically, what you need to derive from this is to make a plan, figure out what's going to suit your needs, and then just do that.
So you became an expert by doing, basically, you were a hobbyist and then took it to the next level. And speaking of connections, yeah, you're frozen. So I'm waiting for it to unfreeze here. I'm probably frozen for you too. Oh, you disappeared. No, now you're back.
There we go.
Yeah, you were frozen for a little while there.
Yeah, I was talking, and then I realized that you weren't actually moving.
So the last thing we saw was you were holding up 2 radios, and I said so it looks like you started out as a hobbyist, and then it kind of just blossomed from there. You like went a little bit nuts with it. So now you
Right.
expert.
Yeah. So basically, what we want to teach today is that you don't need all this. Just find out what is going to work for you, and then just make a plan around that. And then if you like the hobby, then absolutely you can devolve into 14 radios and with more on the way. But it doesn't have to be that, right?
Right.
You can start off basic and find something that's going to work for your situation.
Excellent. All right. So why is it called ham radio? Anyway, I keep getting hassled about that. Like everyone's making fun of it on, oh, is it bacon radio? Is it kosher?
Bacon radio. Yeah. So the technical term is amateur radio. It's the amateur radio service is what the FCC calls it. Ham is a throwback to back when radio first started. Basically, you had professional radio operators, and they were doing telegraphy, keying out Morse code. We didn't have fiber optics across the Atlantic at the time in the early 1900s, so it was all done by radio telegraph. And then here all these amateur operators show up on the radio, and their Morse code skill wasn't at the professional level, and they were generally referred to as ham-fisted operators, and the name kind of stuck.
Ham-fisted, right. All right, so launch into your spiel, because I know you have an outline and you're going to tell us all sorts of things about what ham radios do.
Sure. So first, why ham radio? First of all, it's robust. It doesn't necessarily require infrastructure. There are some aspects of it that do use infrastructure, and then you can decide for yourself later how much of that you want to incorporate into your plan. But at the base level, it doesn't need any infrastructure. And a lot of the modes that do use infrastructure have a lot of redundancies built in. It's free to use, unlike a satellite option, you got satellite phones, satellite radios, satellite communicators. Those all cost monthly. They're also very robust systems, but it costs money every month. Radio, you buy the thing, but then it's free to use after that. Some of the things you can do with radio, obviously you can do voice communications, just push the talk and talk into your group. You can also get a lot of information with ham radio. You can get weather information. There's local weather stations that report into ham radio, and you can get that offline. You can do SMS texting, so I can actually send a text message from this radio to a cell phone anywhere in the world.
Okay, so you can see, because I always picture ham radio as you're out there, you're reaching out and you're talking to whoever is tuned in, I guess. Mm-hmm. But you can just text one person like you would from a phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that feature does require an amount of infrastructure. We can talk about that in a little bit, but it's a capability. You can also do emails over ham radio.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
I know, but it's probably one of the most useful emergency features of ham radio is the ability to send an email. You can send it between radio operators. You can send it to the internet, and then to a regular email address. And so it adds a lot of interoperability between people who aren't radio operators and people who are.
If your Wi-Fi is down where you're at, but not somewhere else, you can email to someone else using the internet from your ham radio. Or right. if Wi-Fi is down everywhere, you're still able to send emails to each other.
Correct. Perfect example is the Christmas morning bombing in Tennessee. There's a guy who runs a YouTube channel for ham radio back there, and both his cell service and his internet provider was AT&T. So he wakes up Christmas morning when neither of those things are working. So he gets on ham radio and starts emailing his family, basically letting everybody know that he's okay, and then trying to find out what's going on.
Wow, that's awesome. So his family has internet, so he just went from ham radio to their Wi-Fi. So
right, yeah, basically he's just getting that email outside of the dark zone of the internet outage. And really, in a lot of disasters, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a localized incident, right? It's going to happen a lot more than a regional, national, or global thing. And so if you can just get that message outside of your local area, it's probably going to get through.
That reminds me, there was another question on the Facebook post that I forgot to go over when we were talking before. Do you know if most stakes still have like a ham radio operator in each stake? Oh, are you not a member of the church? Sorry, I was thinking you were a member of the LDS.
Oh, no, I'm not.
You're
no.
not. Okay, never mind. You don't know the answer to that question. Our mutual friend is, and so I just made that assumption. In the LDS church, we have congregations. The smallest congregation is a ward. Up from that, several wards make up a stake. Well, it used to be that every stake had a designated ham radio operator.
Really?
And, yeah, as part of, because we're very big on emergency preparedness.
That's
and so,
very forward thinking of you.
Yeah. Oh, we have our year supply, and the church is really big on emergency preparedness. And so actually had someone approach me in church last Sunday because I had posted that I was looking for ham radio expert, and they're like, oh, I can tell you so-and-so in the stake is a ham radio person. I'm like, well, I already have someone, but thanks for letting me know. And so somebody else asked me on Facebook if that was still happening. Obviously you don't know, so I'll find the answer elsewhere.
Yeah,
but
I don't know.
That's one of the ways the church stays in touch with each other is at least in the past, each stake has had a ham radio person. So I need to look into that.
Yeah, that's very cool if it's still that way, or even if it just having been that way. It's a cool forward thinking.
I'm guessing it still is. It's just that I've never ever looked into it before. So. All right, sorry I interrupted your flow here.
No, you're good.
All right, keep going.
So we can talk about types of radios, because there are many. So a lot of people will get into the hobby and they'll pick up one of these. This is a Baofeng Uv-5r. People buy them because they're cheap. You can get one of these for about $25.
Oh, sweet.
You get what you pay for, right?
Oh.
They're not the best. They do the job, and what they do reasonably well, but they're pretty basic.
So
but
you
people,
do with that.
yes, a lot of people buy these and think that just magically makes them prepared somehow, and they buy it and they throw it in the bag, and they don't ever program it. They don't know what to do with it. But in an emergency, somehow it's going to help them. And then we'll be talking about why that's not the case. So handheld is typically going to be VHF and UHF. What that refers to is the frequencies that it operates on. And then these are typically around 5 watts of output power. And I know you'd had a question posted about why these over the FRS type walkie-talkies. 5 watts, those are half to 2 watts. And so you're going to, and you get a better antenna on one of these, even though these aren't great, it's going to be better than what you're going to get on one of those off the shelf bubble pack radios. So
does that mean that you can go a lot further away from each other and still you're able to communicate?
To a point, yeah. Okay. So with the FRS bubble pack radio, you're looking at maybe a quarter to a half mile. They're pretty close range radios. If you're trying to keep in touch with just your neighborhood, that might work fine because you don't need a license. The chance of all of your neighbors wanting to get licensed is probably pretty remote.
Right.
So using an FRS radio for close range like that might be a good option for you, depending on what your plan is. In my situation, my plan involves people that aren't close by. And so that wouldn't work for us, but it's all situation dependent.
Right.
But yeah, 5 watts, you get a little more power, but you're still roughly line of sight for range. Okay. And there are a lot of variables that go into that. So the other thing is that people will buy these and say, well, how far can I go with it? And unfortunately, the answer with a lot of ham radio questions is, well, it depends. And we'll try to break that down. But so yeah, it's roughly line of sight. And if you're holding it, so you say 6 feet above the ground or so, line of sight is a few miles.
Ah, okay.
From each direction. So, I mean, perfect scenario, if you're out, because you're in Utah, say you're out on the Bonneville Salt Flats, maybe 6 to 10 miles maybe is what you're going to get out of one of these. You start putting things in the way, like geography, hills, buildings, even trees and stuff, and that will start shortening that range significantly. So generally, yeah, these are what you're going to want for close range, more kind of team level, if you will, communications. And there's a lot of.
That's an
Go ahead.
FR. You said that's an FRS radio?
Yeah, the bubble pack, the walkie talkies are
Oh.
what's called the family radio service, FRS.
Okay. And the one that you got in your hand is a.
This is a Baofeng Uv-5r.
Okay. Just for people that are just listening and they don't see what you're holding up.
Oh, sure.
And that's something that they can find. Where would you buy something like that?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question right now. Ham radios are kind of turning into the toilet paper of 2021.
Really?
You used to be able to go buy these. I know, it's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be able to go get these any day of the week on Amazon, and it would just magically show up at your door 2 days later. Now, they're on Amazon. They're looking at sometime next month for delivery.
Wow.
But there are other places you can get these. Radioddity is one place. And I think that they did still have them in stock. I was looking at them a couple days ago.
That's like Guns and Ammo. Same thing with Guns and Ammo. They're not.
Oh yeah.
Yet right now. It's everyone's freaking out because.
Everyone's freaking out, panic buying all the stuff.
Yeah.
And since they've already got years worth of toilet paper, it's buying radios and guns and ammo apparently.
Right.
And then the handhelds, you can get fancier ones like this one.
So it's smaller, but it's got a bigger antenna. That one. Yeah.
Yep, and it's also. Turn it on here. I don't know if this will show up. It's a touch screen.
Oh yeah, and that's really high tech. This is nothing like what I was expecting.
Right, and this one has a GPS. Actually, both of these have GPS in them, and then so you can use that to keep track of other team members, or other things that are going on around you. It uses APRS, and we'll talk about that in a little bit and what you can do with that. But APRS radio, it also does digital transmission, which may or may not be important to you. We can talk about that too, but suffice to say, it's a lot more feature rich than the Baofeng. So is this one. These are both. This one is fully submersible. This one's weather resistant. So if you're out in the rain, no big deal. They're going to keep working. Not waterproof at all.
The first one, right? You just held up the first one again. The $25 one, right?
Right. So I mean, that's the difference between $25 and these are about $200. This is about $400.
Is the $400 one, the little one, is that one you can text with?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. That would probably be the difference between the little one with the little screen on it as opposed to the $25 one with no real screen.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so you get a lot more capability out of it, but you're also spending a lot more money.
Right.
Does that matter to you? Maybe. You have to make that decision for yourself. Turn the volume down on that so it doesn't start squawking at me.
That's a good idea.
And then as you move up from the handhelds, you can get into what we would call mobiles. So something like this. This is, so it operates on
vehicle, right? So that looks like it goes in your truck or your car or whatever.
Right. A lot of people put these in their vehicles. A lot of people put these in their houses too and use them at home. And then this will operate. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close in size, and there are bigger ones in this, and there are smaller ones in this. And then this will talk on the same frequencies as your handhelds. So this, go ahead.
What is that one called that you have in your hand?
This one is a Tyt Th9000d. And at the time that I got it on Amazon, and it was about $120. So this one's pretty inexpensive, and then the one that I have in my vehicle now is it's kind of the same thing as the $25 Baofeng and the $400 fancy one. This is roughly the same as this in the mobile world, and then I have this version of the mobile that's in my vehicle now. So you get a lot more capabilities, but then it also costs a lot more.
Yeah, I'm starting to see why you have so many, because they do different things and they
right.
have different capabilities. Right.
Yeah, so people use these in vehicles, home stations. Typically, a mobile radio is going to be about 50 watts. This one's 60, I think. The difference between 50 and 60 is it sounds like a lot. It really doesn't make any
So
difference.
that one looks like it's probably not the kind you can email or text with.
With additional devices. So you can actually, it's got a little port in the back. I don't know if that's going to really show up, but you can connect this to a computer.
Oh, okay.
And with some other intermediate devices, you can do those things with this.
Interesting.
But it doesn't do it internally, no.
Okay.
That
looks closer to what I was expecting with the little dials on it and everything.
But yeah, so you got 5 watts, 50, 60 watts, which doesn't make a huge amount of difference. What really makes these better is you're typically going to have a much better antenna on this than you're going to have on this. On your vehicle, it's going to be a lot higher. It's going to have more gain, which what that does is it kind of flattens your transmission. So you're not putting as much straight up, it's going out.
So the one, what do you call that? It's not a handheld. What would you call that? That you're holding?
This one?
Yeah.
A mobile. We call this a mobile radio.
Mobile, you get a lot more distance. You can reach out to people. Okay. Generally,
I mean, it's still going to be kind of line of sight, but if it's on your vehicle, your antenna is going to be higher, and it's going to have higher gain, so you'll have better signal quality, which is going to translate to better distance. If it's on your house, or if you're using it at home, then you can have a really tall antenna, possibly, and then that'll really extend your range. So, I mean, just like
what do you think the range would be if it was at home and you had a really tall antenna?
So say you put an antenna on the peak of your house, it's at 15 feet or so. You could probably house to house 25, 30 miles maybe.
Okay.
And then again, it's going to be line of sight, so it's going to depend on how much stuff is in the way. If you're here and then whoever you're trying to talk to is here and there's a mountain between you, well, that's not going to work, even if that's a quarter mile away.
Right.
But yeah, if you get a high enough antenna, you could do 25 miles.
So it's kind of city, almost like a city limits kind of thing.
Like right. You could talk citywide. Absolutely. And then if you're trying to get into more range, then you can get into, so we said that this is VHF and UHF for the frequencies that it operates. And then you can get into HF radio, which is not line of sight. And you can actually get out quite a bit farther with that. And so then you're getting into something closer to what you're thinking of in Grandpa's basement.
Right. Although it looks like it's got a screen.
Big dials.
And so what do you call that one?
Yes. We would call this a base station.
A base station?
Right. So this is designed to sit on a desk somewhere. It's big, it's heavy. You're not going to want to lug this around in the field. People do. I do.
Most people don't want to.
People aren't going to want to go packing this around. It's probably 4 pounds or so.
And what's that model? So for people that are listening,
this is the Yaesu Ft991. So right. It's a discontinued model. It's the 991A is the current model.
And what's the range on that? If you have a big antenna?
Global.
Okay, so that's what I was thinking. That's what I was picturing at the beginning of this, because you always think, when you think of ham radio, you think about talking to people in other countries.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, and so what does that run?
So this is about $1,200.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's high.
Getting into HF is definitely a step in price. And this is one of the higher end ones from Yaesu, and there are definitely cheaper options. There's the FT891, and I think that's around $600. ICOM has a 7100, and that's around $800.
Oh, okay.
So they're not as feature rich as this is, but they're a lot less money. They'll get the job done.
Right.
But then with this, you're not limited to line of sight. So the way that these operate is your transmission radiates from the antenna at an angle up into the atmosphere, and it actually will refract off the ionosphere and then bounce down somewhere far away.
Okay, that's cool.
And so yeah, you're going up and over instead of trying to go line of sight.
Can you text or email off of that kind of a radio?
Email will work best off of this kind of radio.
Okay.
And when we talk about email in a little bit, I'll explain why. You can do it with the shorter range radios, but it's going to be less reliable and require infrastructure. If you want true off-grid email, HF is where you're going to be.
Ah, that's awesome.
And then, of course, like I said, it costs more.
Right.
But depending on your antenna configuration, like we said, you can talk globally, and then depending on your configuration, a lot closer than that. So there's a propagation called NVIS, which is near vertical incident skywave, and you're shooting your signal straight up, and then it's coming straight down, and that's used in a lot of emergency communication scenarios for regional kind of statewide communications, because even if you're in a valley, because you're shooting your signal straight up, it's coming down over the whole state, so you're getting good coverage that way. And an antenna for that, it doesn't have to be particularly fancy. This is the one that I use most. This is from Chameleon Antenna. It's the MCOM3 portable, and it's it's about just under 100 feet of wire.
Okay.
And so you would string this up in a tree somewhere, and then depending on the configuration that you string it up, you can get different propagation properties if you're trying to get really far, or if you're trying to do NVIS, more regional communications. An antenna like this can do all of it on a wide range of frequencies.
All right. So I see, looks like an antenna behind you. What is that that's behind you?
Yep. So this is from a company called Dipole. It's what we would call a dipole antenna. Basically, that just means it's got the two legs on it. This one is nice because you don't have to string wires up, but it's a lot bigger. So you can pack this around. It's light, it's small, and with some 550 cord or whatever, you can hang it. That is nice because it's freestanding, but you're not going to put that in a backpack.
No.
This will work on a lot more frequencies without fiddling than that one will.
Okay. So yeah, there are so many options. I had no idea.
There are a lot of options. That's why the first outline I gave you was 5 pages long. Let us puked out everything on the screen there. Let's see, where am I? So yeah, with your different antenna configurations, you can have regional, national, or global levels of communications.
Right.
But your mobility is going to be decreased because you're dealing with a larger antenna system.
Yeah, because if you have to stop and put it up in a tree or something, you're not
right
anymore.
Now you're using time. That said, I mean, I can get this hung and get online in 15-20 minutes. If it's something you do, you get better, you get faster at it.
So this really depends a lot on if other people are on ham radio that you can talk to, and whether or not your radio has the capability of sending an email or a text without that goes to the internet. So
right,
because if you're on ham radio and you could only communicate with other people with ham radios, then a lot of it depends on how many people are out there that have them, right?
Right. And so that would be something you would plan ahead of time with the people that you're going to want to talk to.
So like if you have family members in different states or in the same area and you want to stay in communication with them, that's how you've got to figure out what you're going to buy, right?
Right. And then, yeah, depending on how far away they are and all that, it's going to kind of depend on how far into the hobby you're going to have to go. If people always say, well, I live here, and then my daughter or whatever lives 1,000 miles away, what do I need to buy to talk to her? Well, you're going to be buying something more on this level.
Yeah, that's the big
to
one.
do it reliably.
And
then they find out how much it costs, and
yeah,
usually get scared away.
That's an investment.
So types of communication is, you've got the most basic level. You have what's called simplex. All simplex means is it's direct radio to radio communication. These are both set to the same frequency. They're talking directly to each other. Benefit, no infrastructure. The negative is that you're limited in range, right? like I said, line of sight. Even with the mobile, you're still looking at a few miles.
It's kind of like it's like a walkie-talkie, or
yeah. I mean, they operate the same. They
okay,
just have
right.
more power, and they're on different frequencies than a walkie-talkie. But
Okay.
yeah, for all
That
intents
answers
and
that
purposes.
question. They use different frequency, a different frequency, and they have more power. So that's
Right.
the main difference between using those handheld ham radios and walkie-talkies.
Right.
Okay.
And then another thing that you can operate on with these is what are called repeaters. A repeater is just a radio that somebody's put on, typically somewhere high. Either it's going to be on a tower somewhere, or it's going to be on a hill, and it's listening on one frequency and it's repeating whatever it hears on another frequency. So if you're over here and I'm over here and there's a big hill between us, but there's a repeater on top, we would be able to communicate through that repeater, because we can both see the top of that hill, right? Because it's line of sight, we can both see that, and then that would work. The downside is that it's infrastructure. You're relying on somebody else's equipment.
Right.
That may or may not be a bad thing. Depends on how much traffic there is in your area. In an emergency, I would expect repeaters to be, well, of course, they're a finite resource, right? So it depends on how many people are using them in your area. I would expect them to be congested, and I wouldn't want to rely on one. And then, of course, they have to have power. They're grid tied. Many of them will have emergency backups, either a generator, battery, solar panels, and a battery. But if it's a generator, how much fuel does it have? Is somebody going to go refuel that? If it's a battery, you're going to get a couple days tops out of the thing. If it's a solar panel here in the Northwest, and it's nice and sunny today, but in the wintertime, that's often not the case. Or if it's up high and it gets snow on a solar panel, then that's not going to put out a whole lot of power either. So it's not something that I would want to rely on in an emergency, but if that's what you have, then that's kind of what you work with. And then another way to stay in contact with the people that are around you is, if somebody lives on a high ground, use that to your advantage. Basically, you could have, if somebody lives on a hill somewhere, they would act as a relay. And so you've got people all around that might not be able to hear each other on the radio, but that person who lives up high can hear everybody and then relay information. And so that's just part of pre-planning, right? Figure out who lives on the high ground and then take advantage of that. HF radio, we talked about the way that it interacts with the atmosphere. Yeah, we pretty much covered all that already. Modes, phone, voice communications, APRS. So like I said, this radio will do APRS, which is the automatic packet reporting system. Basically what it does is it sends out little packets of data with things like your location, your course heading, your speed, and of course you don't have to transmit all that on it if privacy is going to be a thing. But that's just what most people do with it. So this radio has a GPS receiver in it, and so it can transmit your position. And so you can keep track of other people that are in your team that are using the same protocol. And then another thing that people do with APRS is they'll set up a weather station, and then that weather station will broadcast its weather data over APRS. And so if you leave this thing running long enough, you can pick up those weather stations and you can get localized weather reports right here on your radio without using the internet. Those weather stations are, of course, grid tied to electricity in most cases. Maybe they have an emergency backup. Something to think about. But at least for the, did we lose you again?
Did I freeze?
Okay, it's working.
Yeah, you froze.
It froze for a minute.
Usually it freezes for a few seconds, and then I just wait. So are most of your radio, how are most of your radios powered? Batteries?
Yeah, all the handhelds are battery powered. Of course, all my vehicle-based ones are battery powered. My HF, if I'm operating on the grid, I just got a power supply here. but generally I operate portably with it. And so I built my own power supply battery.
Oh, wow.
So this will run it for about 8 hours.
Okay.
And then I also have solar panel
Ah,
to keep the
awesome.
battery charged.
Wow. Yeah, so you're not running out of power. You're covered.
Right.
Unless
And
it snows or something.
right,
Unless
unless
you
it,
don't get enough sun and run out.
right. And that's just, you don't have to leave the radio running all the time. You
That's
can
true.
extend your operating time a lot. And if power is going to be an issue, that would be something to pre-plan is, I'll have my radio on, say, from 9 in the morning to 9:30, and then shut it off after that. And you're saving power. Let the battery recharge all day. And then, maybe you do an evening check-in as well. I also like to buy my handheld radios around being able to easily charge off the grid. So I can charge this one off of the USB port, which I have on my battery box that I built. So I can keep this going pretty much indefinitely as well. And I think everything that I have here that I've shown you can be recharged off of either USB or like a cigarette lighter in your car.
Oh, that's helpful. So someone asked the question about an EMP and whether that would take out a ham radio.
It's possible.
All right.
I'm not an EMP expert, but what people have done is I've seen people buy a metal trash can, and that will act as a Faraday cage for whatever's inside it. And I've seen them do some testing, and they'll put a radio inside it or a cell phone, and they'll try to call it, and it won't ring. So, maybe that'll save your gear. And then the other way you could get around that is by buying the older type of gear that had tubes in it, like what you think about with Grandpa's basement. An EMP is only going to fry something like this with
That's your little
small surface mount. Right. Well, any of the things I've shown you they're gonna have small surface mount components that are going to be easily susceptible to an electrical discharge like that. Old gear with tubes, it's not going to care. All the tube radios will keep working just fine if you can find one still.
Yeah.
There are people that are into that. They're out there, but they're getting harder to find.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea, though, keeping it under a trash can if you're concerned that that's a metal trash can.
Trash can.
That's going to happen.
And it may work. I don't know.
Of course, if everybody's not doing that, then you might be the only person on radio.
Right. And then you're just sitting there talking to yourself for no reason. Let's see here. But yeah, so with APRS, that you can send the text messages. Even if you're not sending to a cell phone, you can still send a text message radio to radio, and that will work offline. So that's not grid tied.
Oh, that's good. And what does APRS stand for? Did you already tell
me? That's the automatic packet reporting system.
Okay.
Yeah, I might have said that while everything was glitching out. But basically, yeah, your radio is just sending out little packets of data with information like your location, and then if you're sending messages, there are weather stations that will report. So if I just leave this running, it'll pick up those weather stations, and I can see all those weather data offline. And then people can put information out onto that network. It's kind of like it operates kind of like a social medium, right? You can put out whatever, every time this transmits your packet, you can have a little message in there. You can have your little status message, or if something's going on in your community, if there's a natural disaster, if you've got flooding, closed roads, down power lines, people can actually put that information into APRS, and you can receive that and then kind of keep up to date on what's going on around you. If you use a computer along with this, then you can also have all that information displayed on a map, which is a lot nicer than just reading it on a list, which is what you're going to get with this radio.
Right. All right. So I know I'm looking on your outline as well. We need to get to how to get started and how to get licensed, and that
sure.
Because that's of course the biggest question is, how do I get started on this? Like someone like me who's got no background at all in this, but I want to have something in in case of an emergency. And let's say, well, I have a mom that lives 30 miles away. And then yeah, let's see if I just wanted to keep in touch with her.
Okay. If you're able to both put an antenna on your house, and I don't know what the topography looks like between your house and her house, but assuming that there's
It's fairly
nothing
flat. I'm in Denver, but we're not near the mountains, so.
Okay. Then a mobile like this, I was talking about earlier, this 9000D would probably do it.
All right, that's the one that looks like a little car radio for those of you that aren't.
Right.
It.
And then, yeah, just basically what's going to help you is going to be whatever kind of antenna you have.
Okay.
And of course, the higher you can,
both of us would need to have one of those and an antenna.
Right.
All right.
And if that's the one person you're trying to keep in touch with, they make directional antennas. They're called Yagis. And so you would just point that at her house, and that's going to poke, an antenna like this is going to radiate your signal pretty uniformly in all directions. You put a Yagi on your house, point it at your mom's house, and it's going to put most of that energy in that one direction. So that's going to increase your likelihood of being able to get through as well.
Okay, and then she would point it in my direction.
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of like the old days where you had to sit there and aim your satellite TV dish, and yeah, the same kind of concept.
Right.
As far as licensing goes, ham radio, amateur radio is split up into 3 different classes of license. You've got what's called technician, general, and extra class. And then each of those classes has different privileges and frequencies that you can operate on. Each class requires passing a knowledge test, which it's not, the first 2 aren't that hard. It's all multiple choice. And then the first 2 are a 35 question multiple choice test. Tests are typically $15. The people that administer the test these days are all volunteers. Back in the day, the FCC did it. You had to drive to an FCC office somewhere. There probably would have been one in Denver, but say you were somewhere more rural in Colorado, well, that meant they had to drive all the way to Denver to take that test. Nowadays, it's all done by volunteers. It's a lot more local and community. It's in the community level. You don't have to travel as far. And actually, now, because of COVID and all that, a lot of places are doing it online. And so you would actually be able to do a video chat like we were doing, and somebody would be administering a test. And so that's making it a lot more convenient. But so that typically is $15, and that money goes to the volunteers to cover the administrative fees or administrative costs of proctoring that test.
And so is technician class the lowest, basically the lowest, the easiest one to get?
Right, that's the first one.
All right, so that's where you would start.
That's where you start.
Okay.
And then one other note is, if you're going to get licensed, do it now. It's going to start costing money. The government has figured out that they're not charging ham radio operators any money for licenses, and that just cannot be abided. And so they're going to start charging $35. And I haven't seen a date for that yet. I would expect it within the next few months. So if you want to do it while it's still free, do it now.
All right.
But yeah, so technicians, it's the first license class. So that's going to get you UHF, VHF access. For using your handhelds, for using your UHF, VHF mobiles. You can do a little bit on HF with it, but it's pretty limited. This is mostly
HF is where you get the whole world. So
right.
If you want HF, if you want to talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime, you have to get a general or an extra.
Yes.
License.
So yeah, you can do a little bit on it as a technician. Nothing that I would consider super reliable for an emergency communications.
Okay.
And if you want to get on that, yeah, you're looking at getting your general license. Extra doesn't get you a ton more than general. Basically, that's where you would go if you're doing it as a hobby, and that gets you some street cred in the ham world.
So is that what you have? Do you have extra?
I don't. I'm a general class right now. I am studying to take my extra, and we'll probably do that. Well, I was planning on doing it this month, but the test got pushed back. So we'll see
How
when that
hard is the
happens.
test for the technician?
Technician's pretty easy. It's a 35 question multiple choice test. And what's nice about all 3 levels is that all of the questions are publicly available. So there are resources online. You can go, you can read all the questions, you can learn the answers. A lot of it's going to be pretty simple, kind of procedural stuff that you can use basic logic on. There'll be a little, on the technician level, there'll be a little bit of electronic components and some radio theory. Yeah, you can memorize that pretty easily. General, it's similar, but everything's just a little bit more difficult. It's the next step, but it's not too much of a step. A lot of people will take their technician and general test in the same sitting. So if you go and you pass tech, you can take your general immediately after that. And,
okay.
And then you only have to go.
So how do you find where to get licensed? Can you just Google? Like,
some people even do all 3.
Oh, really? Can you just like Google ham radio license and it'll come up and tell you where you can get your tests and licensed and everything?
You can do that. You know, typically they're put on by local clubs. So if you find a ham radio club in your area, just put in your city or county, and then ham radio club, and typically you're going to be able to find a club that's doing that in your area. The online ones that are happening now, you don't have to be in that same area. So you could be, it could be a club in Florida doing an online class, or I'm sorry, an online test, and you can get in on that.
Are there classes on ham radios?
There are. Clubs will typically do what they call ham cram weekends, and it'll be a 2-day class, and it basically will just go through all the questions and all the answers, and then they'll test immediately after that class.
Oh, okay.
But that they call it a cram because they're just cramming all that information into a 2-day class, and then you test. But yeah, that's available.
All right. And so I was just going to go through some of the questions that people asked on the Facebook page. As far as one of the ladies had a question about not having your information publicized, because she said right now, if you're licensed, you can find everyone who's got a license and see their information.
That's correct. Yeah, you can go on the FCC database, and all ham licenses are public information, including an address. But that doesn't need to be your home address. You can use a PO box, and that will increase your privacy significantly.
Yeah, I would think that PO box would be a good way to go if you're concerned.
Yeah, and you can absolutely do that.
And then someone else asked if you thought the Morse code requirement going away was a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I don't know Morse code, and I got my license, so I think it did pretty well for me.
Right. All right, and so you've gone through some of the types of radios, and so it sounds really, it's like you said, it's circumstance driven, whether who you're trying to talk to, how far away they are, what kind of radios you need to get. And so for someone like me, who's like we talked about city, like basically a city radius, it's that little, what did you call that again? That looks like a car radio.
Yeah, a mobile.
A mobile, okay. Yeah, you can see I'm clueless about this kind of stuff. And that one was how much?
This one was $120. They'll range anywhere from $100 to, you can spend $600 on one if you want to. And it's just going to depend on what features.
But I could do something for around 100. And that one you said you could do email from, but you need to have some other kind of hardware to go with it to do that?
Right. You need a computer, laptop, something like that, and then an interface, basically to bring the audio out of your computer into the radio and vice versa.
But you don't need Wi-Fi.
Don't need Wi-Fi, no. It would all be a hardwired connection between the radio and your computer.
Well, everybody has a computer, so that doesn't seem like that would be too difficult.
Nope, as long as you can keep it running.
All right. And I think we covered licensing. I'm trying to figure out what else someone needs to know to get started. Like if they're like, okay, I'm down for this, I want to get a ham radio and I want to get started. So they need to buy the equipment they need to get licensed, and they have, like you said, crash courses. If you want to do that, or you can just find the material online and study it yourself and take the exam. What else do we,
Yeah,
what else do we need to know about this?
there's a website called hamstudy.org, and so that's, yeah, and that's going to have all the questions for all 3 license levels on there, and a lot of good information as far as learning the material. And you can go on there and you can take practice tests, and it's got all the information, and that's free. And so that will go a long way to helping you get your license. There are 3 channels on YouTube that I wanted to talk about. One's called the Ham Radio Crash Course. It's a wide variety of topics on there, and he does a very good job of breaking down complex things into easy to understand content. So you can go on there, he'll be talking about something complicated, but he'll make it sound easy. There's one called KM4ACK. He's a guy back in Tennessee. A lot of his content revolves around emergency communications and using WinLink, which is the email service I was talking about earlier. And then another one, OH8STN, and his entire channel is pretty much revolves around off-grid emergency communications.
And these are YouTube channels.
So all 3 of those are on YouTube, yeah.
OH8STN, is that his call sign or something?
That's his call sign, yeah.
So are you assigned a call sign when you get licensed, or can you choose one, or how does that work?
Both. So you will be assigned a call sign, and it just kind of comes out, sequentially out of the system. So the number in there, so like KM4ACK4 basically tells you where in the country he is. The country's divided into segments, and then each one has a number. So you hear if you hear a call sign, it kind of tells you where that person is generally in the country. And then the letters in it are just issued sequentially.
Oh, okay. So just KM4ACK, that isn't, how can you tell where that's at from hearing that?
Yeah, so he's in Tennessee, but I can't remember exactly where the borders are, but basically that tells you that it's East Coast.
Oh, okay.
And so here in Washington, we are 7. California in the Southwest is 6. Oh, and I'd have to look at a map to remember what all the rest of them are.
All right, because one of my friends gave his call sign on Facebook, KK6MYB. So 6, you said, was California or West Coast?
California, Southwest, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So here in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, we're 7. California, Arizona, New Mexico, that down in that Southwest area, that's 6. And so it just kind of helps you narrow down where somebody is if you're talking to them on HF from a long way away.
I was going to say, how does that work? Like if say my mom and I both got radios and we're both licensed and we have call signs, do we have to, how do I get started talking to her?
It will be something you would agree upon ahead of time. I mean, or you can just leave the radios on full time and you would just call each other. But you would say, 9, if you're going to check in, say 9 in the morning or 6 at night or something like that, and have a time. And you would just get on and you would give your call sign, calling them, whatever their call sign is.
So I get on, I say I'm call sign, I don't know, AH56, whatever, calling, and I'd say her call sign.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it is kind of like the breaker stuff from back in the day that I was thinking of.
Well, it's similar. We don't say breaker
That's
usually.
Truckers. I think that's a trucker. Do truckers still say breaker?
It's a great question. I don't know. I don't hang out on TV.
That's what I always think of too when I think of ham radios. So you do use your call sign. As soon as you get on, you use your call sign, and then you say the call sign of the person you're calling. And so when you hear your call sign being said, then you know that someone's trying to talk to you.
Right.
Okay.
And then according to FCC regulations, you have to give your call sign every 10 minutes during a conversation and at the end of the conversation.
Ah, okay.
So you have to keep identifying yourself.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah, I think I was picturing it as sort of just you get on and you start talking. I didn't realize you have to keep using your call sign.
Right. I mean, that would be more like CB, where you just get on, start talking to people. You don't
I
have a
guess
call
that's what
sign.
truckers use as CB. Huh?
A lot of them do, yeah.
What's the
A
difference?
lot of them are on ham as well.
What's the difference between CB and ham?
CB is unlicensed, and you're limited to 4 watts. Typically, if you're on a different mode called single sideband, you can go up to 12 watts, but most of the radios are going to be 4 watts. And then it's just a different frequency. So so VHF, we're talking about, it's just called 2 meters. And what that is it's the wavelength. The wavelength is 2 meters long. CB is 11 meters. So it's just a different frequency.
Okay. Yeah, I get kind of lost in the frequency stuff.
Oh yeah, they make charts, and it's a good idea to have one, because I mean, even if you've been doing it for years, it's easy to lose track of what goes where and where you're allowed to operate. And so having that chart printed out is definitely a handy thing to have.
Oh, that's why that guy sent me a chart.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this guy sending me a chart? I don't know what this is about.
Yep, I would print that out and laminate it and keep it with your gear.
So what do you do when you're looking at that chart? What does that tell you?
It will tell you all the frequency bands. So like 2 meters and 70 centimeters, that's your VHF, UHF. Once you get into HF, you'll hear bands like 10 meters, 17, 20, 40.
But does that mean that you're setting your radio at a different frequency? Depending
Yes.
Okay. So, see, I'm just picturing turning it on, and then, using my call sign to call someone, but I need to set it to a frequency.
You would have to set it to a frequency, and in the case of keeping in touch with your mom, you'd have to have that. You have to pick a frequency ahead of time.
So we would both be on the same frequency.
You both be on the same. But the chart so it's got all those different bands on it, and then it breaks it down into the 3 different license classes and tells you what each class can do in that band.
Oh, okay. So if you're not licensed and you look at a certain band, you're like, oh, I can't go into that. So I can't talk to anybody who's on that band.
Right.
Okay. It's starting to come clear to me. There's a lot to this.
It's a lot of information to digest. It's a lot more complicated than people probably think it is.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot more than I thought. So a good place to go from here would be to check out some of these YouTube channels.
Absolutely.
Hamstudy.org, that's where you learn the tests for licensing. That's a website. But the YouTube channels were Ham Radio Crash Course, and then OHSTN, and then
OH8.
OH8.
Yeah, OH8STN.
STN, and then KM4ACK.
Yep.
Okay, so those are ham radio YouTube channels. You don't need to have a ham radio to get there. You just
Right.
Go there and watch some videos and get some more information and sort of get more familiar with all of this. But you basically need to get licensed. You need to figure out what your situation is, who you're trying to reach, then decide which piece of equipment works for that. Have a plan, because you said you need to figure out who you're talking to so you're on the same wavelength. Well, let's see if I'm going to add my brother in just for fun. I have a brother, and he's actually in Seattle. And
okay.
He's much further. So, and then let's say I was really wanting to get into this, and I've got my whole family, which is all around the country.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that little mobile one that you showed me is not going to work for that, right? You have to go to the bigger.
That's not going to do it. No.
You have to go to HF.
Yeah. Go to HF.
Okay, and so that's the big, what do you call that? Base station?
Base station, yeah.
All right. And
they do make ones that are smaller. They do make ones that are around this mobile size. That's just the one that I happen to have.
But you're looking at like 800,
but yeah,
800 and up for that kind of bigger.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot more electronics in those radios, and those electronics cost a lot more money.
All right. But then it would still be the same case after that, as far as everyone would have to agree what frequency we're going to be on and what time we want to meet up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we could email each other from that.
Yep.
If it's connected to your computer.
All right.
And texting, can you text on that?
You can. There are some, you can to a cell phone, and then you can also do text messaging between radios. There are digital modes that kind of operate. Think about the old IRC chat rooms on the internet. there are modes for radio that operate kind of like that. And
Oh,
so you can have a whole bunch of people sitting there and they're having a chat session.
boy, there's a lot.
Radio.
There's a lot to this. All right. So you can do anywhere, anything from just, a couple of ham radios for you and your spouse or your friend, and when you go off-roading, to HF, where you can reach the whole globe. So, all right, that's a lot. So you just have to figure out what your situation is, who you're trying to reach.
Your situation, figure out who you want to talk to, how far away they are, and then derive what equipment you're going to need from there. I mean, the biggest thing is to make your plan now. Don't wait till it's too late, until you're in a critical situation, and then realize that, oh, I don't have a plan. I don't have the equipment that I need to accomplish this task that I'm trying to do. Do it now and practice it now, because it is a skill that will require practice to do well. It's not something you just pick up and it magically works. Like anything else, you got to practice it. You can't just buy the thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when I'm dealing with people that, like myself, who've never done this. So we all have to learn it. So maybe it's a good idea to find someone local that already has radios that can, like a club. Do most?
Absolutely, I would look into finding a local club, and the members of that club are going to be more than happy to help get everybody licensed and on the air.
And mentor you a little bit and help you through that process.
We call that an Elmer in the ham radio world.
You call it a what?
An Elmer.
An Elmer?
Yeah, an Elmer is a mentor for ham radio.
Ah, okay.
I don't know where that one came from.
I was going to say, is that an acronym? Because I don't see how that works in an acronym. But
just an old guy's name.
So find an Elmer.
Yep, find an Elmer.
And get on YouTube and look at some of these channels, and then hamstudy.org. This is awesome. This is a lot. I can see why your first outline was so big.
Right.
There's really is a lot to this. And again, if you're just watching this, I recommend that you go to YouTube and look at the video of this, because he showed us his radios. And so as far as buying all those radios, you said some of them are not terribly available right now and some are, but where are the best places to buy some of those?
I mean, of course, a lot of people buy things on Amazon. Amazon has a lot of stuff. It's not always going to be the best price. The places that I like to hang out are Ham Radio Outlet, and that's a national chain. So it makes shipping nice, because whatever store is closest to you that has the thing, that's where it's going to ship out of. So it'll get to you a lot faster than a big thing is just, say I'm on the West Coast and they're on the East Coast somewhere. I've got an HRO in Portland, so it takes a day or two to get to me. Gigaparts is another big one. And see, R&L Electronics is another big one. Between those three, you should be able to get everything you need.
All right, and they're all online. You can find them online pretty easily.
Ham Radio Outlet does have a lot of stores around the country, so maybe you have one locally. Last I knew, they didn't have their storefronts open to the public. You could do curbside pickup, but they didn't have their storefronts open.
Because of the COVID thing?
Yeah.
Right. All right. Awesome. Well, this has been good. I mean, the fact that you could walk me through it and I could come away with, a basic grasp on it is good. So I can see it's a much deeper topic than what I originally thought. And so I'm glad.
It's a bottomless rabbit hole.
Yeah, I can see why you ended up with so many radios. Like now it all kind of makes sense. So I appreciate the introduction, and now I and hopefully my listeners have a good place to start, at least to go down the rabbit hole if we want, or maybe we might just like go a little bit and just get one radio and go and get set up. So
everybody's case is different, whatever works for you.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Aaron. Do you have any last words of advice or anything before we wrap this up?
Well, I think we just about covered everything that I had intended to.
Awesome. So thank you. It's Aaron Kravik.
That is correct.
I'm sorry about the flub up at the beginning there.
Oh, totally fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And
thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.